Hi, everyone. Lisa Dalton again. I didn't get to answer all the questions that came up in Mario Rica's wonderful event earlier today. So I thought I'd take a few moments to just record some information and share with you some of Mario Rica's responses also that were in the chat, which I think are wonderful. So one of the first questions that I didn't really get to respond to was Bhupendra's. He asked, if I'm playing any character, I want to show some main characteristics, character elements of that character. For example, loyal, friendly, talkative. Should I have to find different PGs for different character elements? Or I have to do one PG which has all main characteristics or character elements of that character. So first, Mario Rica responded wisely. The PG is relating to the character's objective. And part of your question will be answered and discovered by imaginary body, centers, and qualities of movement and atmosphere. Love this answer. I'm going to talk more, but I want to make a distinction between groups of tools. So the psychological gesture, as I mentioned earlier, unifies the entire character into one single tool. However, there are specific tools designed to focus on the art of transforming the characterization aspect. So what is characterization? Characterization is the specific way that this particular character expresses itself. So many characters might have the same objective, and many characters might have the same emotional life. They're happy, they're sad, they're in love, they're angry, they're indignant, they're scared. So what is characterization? Every character is driving for some objective, and they're having emotional responses to the success or failure of achieving that. What characterization is what makes their response different, and how do they reveal that? In what way do they respond and express? So to go to an example, if we all were holding a dying child, we would probably all feel very much the same thing. And we would probably all want, our objective many of us might want to keep the child alive, to help the child live. So we share the objective, we share the emotions. But every single one of us would express, react in a completely different way. And some of us would be more revealing of our reactions, and some of us would mask and hide our reactions. So those differences are where characterization lies, and they could be incorporated into the psychological gesture. Okay, that's those specifics, though, of characterization that might be revealed in a psychological gesture would probably be stronger if you worked separately on those tools first. In Chekhov's technique, he recommended that we practice only one tool at a time. And when we basically repeat that, as Mario Rica says, repetition is the mother of all learning. And when we repeat a sequence with a different tool, we allow just that tool to inform how that sequence is going. And so I just wanted to mention the distinction between characterization and how psychological gesture is coming from another place. And just by the way, of course, characterization, when it's completely integrated into the objective, the needs, the wins, and the losses of the character, is the most highly regarded aspect of performance from other performing colleagues. So that's to say, they don't give Oscars for fighting hard for your belief, and they don't give Oscars for crying on cue. They give Oscars for revealing a new, creative, unseen way of fighting and expressing the specific uniqueness of that character, the transformation of characterization. Okay, so I also wanted to mention, we talked about the possibility of having different psychological gestures, and we can have the overall super PG, and then we can have smaller psychological gestures for one moment or one section, unit, etc. So one of the things I just personally want to say is that I have, for example, a hard time with surprise, with the condition of surprise. And depending on the style, whether it's comedy or drama, I need to have what is archetypal about surpriseness, and then I need to be able to reveal it in the form of the style, which is a kind of form, right? The form of the style. And so I have built a psychological gesture for surprise. And then I put on the imaginary body and the period style or whatever, and allow that gesture to morph depending on the situation. And it's easy for me to actually make a truthful and unforecasted, unanticipated moment of surprise when I shift to that psychological gesture of surprise, which may have nothing to do with the overall super PG of this particular character, but it is morphed into that character. So that's just an example of having a psychological gesture for a reaction. There are many, many ways that you can utilize this. So it's also regarding how, whether the character appears loyal or friendly or talkative or whatever, that is a great deal to do with tempo and rhythm. And you could use the same super PG and slow it down or speed it up, or add molding, flowing, flying, or radiating qualities of movement, which will generate a sensation of this friendliness or this loyalty or something like that. And so so that was one thing I wanted to say. Mariarika says that she never shows the quality. We never show a quality. That's important, because our job as actors is to experience and to radiate this experience of the character, not to show, not to impress, but to express. We don't want to impress, we want to express. That's the gesture of that. And yes, casting directors will sometimes describe the character as loyal or bitchy, but our job as actors is to translate this loyalty or bitchy to the actions that the character does and to the quality of how they do that. And that's Mariarika's comment. So expanding on that, practicing sequences of activity, etudes, business, stage business, a typical scene of that might happen in your play or in your film script, or even Michael Chekhov says, make up an actual personal activity your character might do and repeat that. Give it a clear beginning, middle, and end. Maybe it's a minute long, maybe it's 5 minutes. And keep practicing the exact same sequence of business and keep changing the qualities of that. And that will help you get used to how the quality can be revealed with your footsteps, with your breathing, with your eye life, your hand life, your foot life, all the behavior. And when you practice doing these different qualities, make sure that you're allowing the quality to impact anything that moves, because you move with the quality. So do your thoughts move? Does your breath move? Does this auric energy field move? So it's not just your hands that move. What moves? And one great way to work with these is always to unveil to the max, and don't worry about being a bad actor. Be terrible. Be a terribly big over actor, and let it be very cliche if you'd like, especially for things that you feel like you move it with a quality, but it doesn't seem like the quality is radiating enough to be experienced from the camera or from the audience. That's the time in your rehearsal process, your practice, to really do it way too big, way too big. And then step down gradually to making it more subtle physically without ever letting it lose its radiant power. I don't like to use the word internalize, because when I say I'm going to internalize the gesture, I notice my own radiation drops to my skin level, and I never want that. I want to, that's why I like veil. I like the veil radiating through, permeating. And I imagine if I do it really, really super big and then just try to drop right to close-up level, I often feel the actor's energy just drop. So take your time, slow it down. Take it step by step, micro-size it gradually. If you were learning a brand new dance, you'd start it very slowly. 1, 2, 3. And then you go 1, 2, 3. And you'd pick it up until it goes 1, 2, 3. But you wouldn't jump from 1, 2, 3 to 1, 2, 3 and expect to retain the same power, the same quality of form and dynamic of radiation. You want to allow yourself to build that up. A slower approach now will build lightning results later. And that's one of the keys Michael Chekhov suggested, especially for film and especially for emotional transformations. Take them slowly, build them slowly, practice them. Quality transformations, practice them big, and then make them more and more subtle gradually. That's also a recommendation for when you're doing your archetypal gestures, to realize that you can do it a 75% veil, a 50% veil, a 25% veil, and make them more and more subtle. Now, Mario Rica goes on to say that we don't judge the character. The PG helps you get the character's will, want, and desire to live in your actor's body and their biggest hopes and dreams as an image towards the super objective and the gesture is working for. And that reminds me that Mr. Chekhov said that a half-done gesture will fill the actor halfway. And so that's important, because when we begin to veil it and we begin to make it more in the invisible realm, it's still, you could say, done in the imagination. It's still radiant in its full expansive power. He also says that we live with an image of our objective fulfilled. And that's really critical for us to understand that when you are putting something into your GPS, you want to get to the store and you don't know where that store is, you enter the address in your GPS so that your GPS can lead you there. We have our own internal artistic GPS, and it is connected with a higher ego. That's our GPS. And when we're able to receive the image of our objective fulfilled, then it will lead us there. And when obstacles arise, just like we do when we know where we're going, when we understand where we're going, we can make a detour and we can find our way around that obstacle. And it's often much more interesting. So, so that's a very exciting concept. Maria Rika says, the quality of how is the emotional experience of the PG. Define the character's objective for each scene and toward each other's character and their super objective essence. So you find the PGs for these, and then find how one specifically does their gesture and how, see, this will depend on the other characters as well, not just yours. The how is discovered also in interaction, not alone only. And the direction of energy of what and towards whom, and the quality of how, the quality, the how of it will be discovered in that relationship. So that brings up what I call the plus or minus of relationship. And this concept again of feeling free to have reactive gestures that are, they're reactive gestures. Like when I do my surprise gesture, it's a reaction. It's not actually connected to my immediate objective. It is a reaction. And in this day and age where a lot of times we're not acting as human beings, we're cats, we're sci-fi creatures, and B, we're often not acting with a human being. We have a stick, a broom, we're in a green screen, we have no atmosphere, no real set. Now atmosphere and understanding the image coming from this broomstick with a sign that says, you know, the Incredible Hulk. I need to be able to project onto an invisible partner a gesture coming at me. And that's really cool because that allows you to audition with somebody who's not reading very well. It makes you very independent and powerful if you can imagine the gestures coming toward you from the person that you're in the scene with. And it's exciting because we also then, what Maria Rika goes on to talk about is that everything has a gesture. Atmosphere has a gesture, the other characters before gesture. So when we look at this, there are gestures that are in the atmosphere. You walk into a place and you can feel the air is doing something to you. So it's really fun to actually become that atmosphere and do the gesture of the atmosphere and then switch back into the character and imagine that and how you respond to it, sensing it. And we also have a gesture, for example, if you're a teacher, creating a gesture for your class. If you are a director, creating a gesture for your cast. If you're a cast, creating a gesture of what you want for your audience. So you can use gesture, you yourself can create gesture for your everyday life. You wake up in the morning, how do you want your day to go? And create a gesture. And anytime it starts to go away from that, just do your gesture again or remember your gesture, and it will help get you back onto that track. Maria Rika spoke about receiving as something that's being done to by. So when I'm receiving, there is something coming to me by some other force, the atmosphere, the partner, some other force. And inhaling is one of the ways that we are able to receive and increase our sensitivity to what is the inspiration that is coming to us. Yes, so being done to by inhaling the atmosphere, the image, atmosphere, environment, circumstance, event. Yes, by inhaling the event, circumstance, this is Mariarika, and our fellow characters. The character is either receiving, being done to, inhaling, or doing. A psychological gesture is the inner truth of the character. And she posted a link to YouTube. I also want to mention on Chekhov.net, Chekhov spelled like he spells it on IMDb and on his English language books, Chekhov. There is a resource section. And in that resource section are a number of articles, including some on psychological gesture. And also there are multiple videos on YouTube. Lisa Dalton or Lisa Loving Dalton. I have a question from Karen. So I want to thank Bhupendra for mentioning or posing this question. I hope that's been helpful. Karen said, as an energetic gesture, that is what it is. Oh, sorry. Karen's question was, how would you translate these gestures into film acting? And Mariarika responded, as an energetic gesture. And that is what it is in the end. The energy body does the gesture. The physical body is free and at ease. So I want to just show you or tell you a little story on a show called Inside the Actor's Studio. Anthony Hopkins was being interviewed by the host, and they were talking about Howard's End, I believe it was, with Emma Thompson. And through the play, Anthony Hopkins, who we know is a Chekhov actor, they were discussing psychological gesture on Inside the Actor's Studio, and the host said, wanted him to talk about this one particular moment where Emma Thompson comes to Anthony Hopkins and tells him that she's not going to be staying with him. And he knows it's coming. He knows the information is coming. And in the movie, Anthony Hopkins is standing, and she comes up to him, and she speaks to him, and she starts to speak, and he puts his hand right by his face like this. And she's right here, and then he takes his hand away to not be rude, and she stays there, and he ultimately sinks down, and he sinks all the way down to the ground. And the host thinks this movement is the gesture. He thinks that physical movement that we see on camera is the psychological gesture. And I say, no, that moment is a jewel in Anthony Hopkins' performance, inspired by the gesture, which in my imagination is something like this, because I feel like this is what I see. When she comes up, he goes like this. And when she says it, he goes, no. And what's left, all we see in the movie is what we might call the residue. When he goes like this, it has behind it the entire power of no. But all we see is that moment. And, but when he takes his hand away, it's still there. That entire, we feel in his body that the gesture, the hand is still there. It's invisible, but it is still there. And that is the real power. That's when it becomes invisible, but it doesn't become internal. It is still radiant and still filling energetically the entire space. So I hope that's helpful. Also, there's a character in a story called 101 Dalmatians, Cruella de Vil. She's the main evil person. So I want to show just an example of the three-part, the intellectual approach to finding a gesture for her. So I start with, what does she really want? She wants all the Dalmatians. Okay, so her basic gesture is a gather, but the way she does it, it's a grab or a capture or a snatch, okay, or kidnap. But what triggers me? What word? Snatch. I like that. Okay, so she snatches. So her main gesture, the archetype, which is a gather, becomes now with a different tempo, rhythm, and quality, right? It becomes snatch there. And the whole body has to be involved. So I've got to really snatch. Now, I'm going to ask another question, which is, what if I get them all? And in my imagination, my objective fulfilled is this beautiful Dalmatian coat. It's a beautiful Dalmatian coat. It's like goes like this. So my victory gesture is, it's kind of like I snatch. That's gesture one. Gesture two, like this. My hand is up here, there. And now the opposite. So the question of, I'm going to ask this question, this is my loss. What happened to Cruella that makes her need this? And I'm going to go to the worst possible scenario. At 3 years old, all the kids in the neighborhood took all my clothing and ripped it off and laughed at me horribly. I was horribly bullied. And so my loss gesture is, and so from the side, and my feet, they're ungrounded. I'm struggling for balance, and I'm exposed in terrible, vulnerable exposure. Now I have 3 gestures, and I'm going to start with the loss gesture, go through the victory, through my core gesture of snatch, and I'm going to button it. This is going to change the ending of my snatch to include my victory moment, and I will have basically a clear beginning, middle, and end that merges all 3 together, and it looks something like this. It goes. Now, with that in mind, everything that happens in the entire story is somewhere between here and here and here. Well, I never show this vulnerability, but it manifests, for example, when my guys come in and tell me that they've captured all the Dalmatians, because my victory gesture is here, right? I go, I'm doing this cheesily. I'm definitely indicating this, okay? But I come here and I go, that is wonderful. I knew you could do it, okay? And a month later, when they say, oh, madam, all the Dalmatians have escaped, my response is can be something like, I do not want to hear this. And I'm back in this position. If my gesture had not been to gather, but had been to smash, and if my victory gesture was some kind of power down here, so I'm smashing, yeah, there, and my loss gesture were somewhere in here instead of back here, then when my guys come in and tell me that they've captured all the Dalmatians, my response is going to be, that's great, just great. I knew you could do it there. And it's micro versions of my gesture. And when they later say they've all escaped, I come in. What are you going to do to find them? And I'm in here. So all my physical behaviors can have a resonance or can be inspired by that particular gesture. And there's no right gesture and no wrong gesture. Gesture is right if it does stimulate you and inspires you. So I hope that was helpful. And I love Mario Rica mentioning the energy body does the gesture, and the physical body has a free, easy sense. So it feels very natural, very fluid, depending on the style that you're working in. Some things like sitcom are actually pretty unveiled, and you can actually see, and high drama, you can actually see some very unveiled gestures. And so that's a possibility. And I just want to close with one more thing, which is that there was a question about a list. Are there lists? And there are lists. We have a Michael Chekhov playbook, and I have lists of atmospheres, and I have lists of qualities and things like that. But I have a question. I mean, what would happen if instead of you being given a list, you began to create your own list? How might that feel for you as a creative artist? If you begin practicing and start coming up with your own lists, there are lists of emotions, there are lists of qualities, there are lists of textures. You can use many, many different inspiring things. You can look at the zodiac and you can say, gosh, what's the psychological gesture of a Virgo, right? And you can come up with your own. Of course, if you know Rudolf Steiner's work, there are eurythmy gestures. And all that to say that Michael Chekhov didn't use the archetypal gestures of push, pull, etc. with everyone. In fact, with Mala Powers, he used the eurythmy gestures rather than push-pull. He used psychological gesture quite a bit, but he came at it strictly through eurythmy gestures. So there are many ways into it, not just the way that we've shared today. And you can also create a repertoire of tools or skill sets in your artistic toolbox by developing the ability to practice the archetypal sensations, like what are all the basic human emotions, practice those as moving with those qualities and sensations. Practice the archetypal gestures, the basic gestures we all know and go through, because they will build. Practice the basic archetypes of characterization. Are you a villain? Are you a victim? Are you a bystander? Are you a witness? What level of authority do you have? What level of intelligence do you have? These basic types that you're most likely to play, so that you can get the core of those, really at your fingertips. It's in the same way that a dancer is going to practice their pliés, their battements, their jetés, and their pirouettes. There's a certain set of things they're going to have. And then the choreography will completely change the style, the quality, and the combinations. But if they can't do them basically, they have to learn them new every time. So you can work with creating PGs for certain events, archetypal events, such as celebrations, victory and defeat, separation and reunion. Those are examples of PGs that you can create. And with that, I want to thank you all again for a lovely session.